All right, I'm here with Kyle Jacobson. He's a co-host with Gamblin Gauchos. If you are on Twitter, you probably know them from their infamous top 10 lists, from the best bridges in the Big 12, or I guess it's, yeah, top 10. Best bridges in the Big 12 to, whatever else it could be. Kyle, how's it going, man?
Good, man. It's a great day in West Texas, and yeah, the well was kind of running dry at the end of the summer with those list ideas, so we kind of just came up with whatever we could.
I love them, and they generated a whole lot of buzz for sure. And every now and then you would tag me in one on the Longhorns account, and my phone would just blow up nonstop from people arguing over the best bridges, and I just thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
Um, so big game this weekend, I think, for both programs. Tech coming off of a loss, which was a little closer, I think, than I expected against NC State, and then Texas obviously um, beating UTSA by 21, which I think was a lot less comfortable than a lot of Texas fans wanted. But last year, Texas kind of offensively exploded against Tech, looked very good. Um, Defensively, not so much, giving up 35. But this year, the Texas defense looks a little bit better improved. So offensively for Tech, the most important position on the field, the quarterback. Is there any chance that Tyler Shuck is good to go this week?
No, he probably won't be back until after the bye week. I think there was some talk that he might return against Oklahoma State, which is still 2 more weeks out, but it'll be Donovan Smith starting, and then I think you'll see at least a little bit of Baron Morton in the rotation. Both pretty young and inexperienced guys. This will be Donovan's seventh start. He started 4 games last year toward the end of the season in the bowl game, and he replaced Shuck as the starter when Shuck went down against Murray State. But the coaches have already said they've scripted at least like a drive or two for Morton, and I think it's also kind of the case that if Donovan really struggles, well into the second, third quarter, they might just make a full on replacement for the rest of the game. So I think you'll get at least a decent look at both of them.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, both really young quarterbacks, but they've got a lot of good receivers to kind of lean back on. And so far this year, have spread the ball around a lot. Who do you think the quarterback's going to lean on most? Out of, I really saw, looking at the stats, four guys that really stood out on the stat sheet.
Yeah, I think everybody expected Miles Price to be kind of the go-to guy in this offense this year. He's the starting slot receiver, and he's actually been a little bit less involved than most people anticipated. They've been throwing a lot more to the sideline. We have a rotation of like four big body guys that they're all 6'4", 6'5".
Mhm.
That'd be J.J. Sparkman, Loic Fungi, Trey Cleveland, and Jaron Bradley. So they've kind of gotten a pretty good amount of the volume of targets to this point. I think if Tech is going to be successful and take a step forward on offense, I think that looks like Miles Price getting a little bit more involved. He's the most kind of dynamic playmaker we have. And like I said, I just don't think he's really gotten the touches or the target share that his talent commands. And so, the offense has definitely sputtered for huge chunks of the last 2 games against Houston and NC State. And so I think if we're going to be more successful, Price needs more touches. But like you said, there's plenty of guys for the targets to go around.
Right, and you mentioned big body guys. You have, I think you said four of those guys. Would you say is Price more of a like take the top off a defense kind of player, or do you have somebody like that?
We don't. That's actually probably one of the biggest limitations. But Price he's a smaller guy and he's shifty and quick, but he's not exactly like a straight line burner.
Mhm.
Um, we really have very few deep threats like that. If we're going deep, it's going to be more of like a jump ball situation where we rely on one of those big targets to just go up and make a play. We don't really have anybody that fits that skill set where they are just kind of like a deep route burner. So
Right.
and I think that also speaks to why so many of the targets at this point have been kind of short game to intermediate. Very few deep shots down the field because we just don't really have the personnel for that.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think that kind of plays in Tech's favor a little bit. Texas hasn't been great against guys that can run a deep route like that and just take the top off of them. But I was talking with one of my family members over the weekend, and our corners really struggle when the ball is in the air and they have to make a play on it. They're more reactionary guys, not so much there's the ball, find ball, and knock ball away. So I think that's something that even though it's not, you're not going to take the top off of him. I think that deep ball might hit a couple times. Um, but of course, for the deep ball to hit, you have to have time to let those routes develop. Tell me a little bit about the offensive line. I've watched a few games so far this year, a few Tech games, but it hasn't really stood out to me as being necessarily awful or obviously really great. But you obviously will have a much better view on that. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the offensive line has struggled to get a push in the run game. I think we've managed to run the ball okay at times, but a lot of that is really kind of like the quarterback scrambling or just the running backs making a good play. They
Hmm.
break through contact at the line of scrimmage. It's less so that we're successful because a bunch of holes are opening up. Pass protection has been a real problem, and you combine that with a young quarterback who's kind of having trouble processing everything quickly enough. There have been times where the protection is really bad, and then there's been times where it's adequate, but we're still standing there in the pocket with the ball too long. So the offensive line kind of hit what I hope was rock bottom against Houston. They allowed 4.5 sacks to Houston's defensive end, who actually set an American Athletic Conference record with that total. I think there was 6.5 sacks total that game,
Wow.
and other kind of quarterback hurries. So it was a really bad performance, but I think they did kind of step it up against North Carolina State, which is a good defense in a
Yeah.
hostile road environment. So that was nice to see them make some progress. But again, you're still dealing with the quarterback at that point making his sixth career start in the most hostile environment he's ever been in, and so
Right.
there was still some issues at times, and that manifests itself with stalled drives, turnovers. So I think both kind of need to complement each other a lot better moving forward for Tech to be successful on offense. And I think that's probably by far our biggest weakness is if an opposing team's front seven can kind of exploit that lack of experience, lack of talent. I think that's definitely the weakest link because we have some skilled running backs. I think our quarterbacks are skilled. Like I said, they just kind of have trouble with the processing part of the game. But yeah, I think a good defensive line or some creative blitz schemes can really rile up our offense.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the run protection has been bad, but you do have some very talented running backs. Even in the three deep, Bryson Donnell. I lived in Tyler for 6 years and covered high school football out there, so familiar with
Yeah.
his game. But obviously, Sir Thompson and Taj Brooks, both big names at Tech. So can Texas expect to see more of a 1-2 punch from those guys, or do you think y'all will lean on one more than the other in this game?
It's really been a pretty true like 1 and 1A type deal, even going back to last season with Brooks and Thompson. I think Thompson has technically been the starter. Like he goes out there on the first drive most
Mhm.
games, but it's pretty 50-50 just depending on, I guess, game flow, other personnel matches and things like that. So in the Houston game, Taj was running a little bit better, and so he kind of got more touches at the end of the game. And it was the opposite against NC State. So I think they also might just kind of go with the hot hand.
Sure.
But yeah, I would expect to see both of them share the snaps about 50-50. Like I said, until it kind of reaches the point that one maybe starting to play a little bit better than the other. But yeah, I think they're both starting caliber running backs, and yeah, it's been tough to get the run game going to this point. Um, I hope that Tech can find a little more success doing that, and they're both very capable of exploiting that if they get a little bit better blocking.
Right. Obviously, game is in Lubbock. Everyone's favorite tradition, the tortilla throw or tortilla toss. I don't know which y'all prefer. Um, I know that. I don't know. I think it's banned. You can't bring tortillas into the stadium, but clearly they don't do a very good job enforcing that. And I've heard of several methods to sneak tortillas in, but I want to know from someone who goes to these games and who lives out there, what's the most effective way to sneak tortillas into the stadium?
Well, they were pretty diligent about it when I was a student, and so a lot of people would just like slide them in their boots or like put them under their hat, but they actually they make you take off your hat when you go into the stadium. Um, they used to make you kind of like roll up your jeans just to make sure that you didn't have something in your boots.
Right.
But yeah, people get real creative. They'll wrap like saran wrap around their chest or legs or whatever, and like strap the pack of tortillas to their body. Um, we always think it's funny as Tech fans when like it's happened a couple times that the opposing team wins and then they'll like pose with themselves eating a tortilla on the
Yeah.
field and we're like that was like taped up to somebody's sweaty leg or
Yeah.
something, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely some creative ways to get them in there, and I wouldn't recommend trying to taunt the students with them, like I wouldn't touch them or eat them or any of that. Just leave them on the field.
No, I remember there was I don't remember what year exactly. It was a while back. But there was an infamous one of a Texas player eating one in the locker room after the game. And that was just knowing what I knew about how fans snuck those in.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, please don't do that ever again.
Yeah, and I think it is kind of one of those like it's banned, wink, wink. Like they don't really try that
Right.
hard to root it out. I mean, so many people get them in. You don't really have to be that creative. But
Yeah.
I think once they realize, I think they tried to crack down on it a little bit, and once they realize we're not stopping this, they kind of just are cool with
Right.
it. And like the security staff knows the deal. Like opening kickoff, a million of them will land on the field, and they just
Mhm.
kind of take like a few seconds to get them off the playing field, and then just move on with the game. So it's a fun little tradition.
Yeah, I love that. I love those quirky little things about college football, even if it's a team I don't like a whole lot, I can
Yeah.
appreciate. Okay, so back to the football side of things. Transitioning to the defensive side of the ball, Tech has kind of been notorious the last several years for being terrible on defense. What's the improvement this year? Because it looks a little bit better. And I don't know how good Houston is, and obviously Murray State was very bad. Um, but looked good against NC State. So what improvement have you seen this year?
Yeah, I've actually seen quite a bit of improvement. If you just looked at our box scores or final scores, you'd see that Houston scored, let's see, 30 points, but 20 of that was in regulation, and
Right.
7 of those 20 were on a pick six. So actually, the defense only surrendered 13 against, a pretty good Houston team. Like I think Houston would be maybe somewhere near the middle or between middle bottom of the Big 12 this season. And then NC State, their quarterback Devin Leary is on NFL draft boards, and
Hmm.
he's ACC preseason Offensive Player of the Year, and I think we held him to 120, 140 yards passing, and same type of deal. Surrendered 24 points, 27 points maybe, I can't remember, but um, 7 of those again were on a pick six, and then others were like, we muffed a punt at our own 12, and they started with the ball there, and so
Right.
if you actually dig into the drive by drive stats, there's been really very few kind of sustained drives against Texas Tech's defense this season. And you're right. I mean, it's been so bad for so long that I'm kind of conditioned to like not really believe what I'm seeing yet. Like I want to see them do this for 5, 6 games in a row before I really buy in.
Yeah.
But there do seem to be some signs of improvement for sure. A new defensive coordinator this year, a ton of just age and experience with like COVID years, grad transfers. There's a lot of guys playing their fifth or sixth year of college football, and even if you are a little bit short on the talent side, there's something to be said for a guy making his 30th career start or something like
Right.
that.
Right. Absolutely. And like you said, not buying into it yet, but I think if they can pass the test against this Texas offense, I mean, I don't see any reason why you can't be bought in after that, especially if Quinn Ewers is the one taking snaps. Hudson Card, I don't know. He doesn't move the needle for a lot of Texas fans because it seems like the offense is just stalls so often with him. But we won't know who's starting until probably the first offensive snap of the game.
Yeah.
Um, but even without the quarterback, Texas obviously still has a lot of weapons. Main one, Bijan Robinson. I always ask every person I interview, who are the guys that you see that can stop Bijan Robinson, or if not stop him, at least slow him down?
Yeah, well, you beat me to my answer. I don't know if you'd stop Bijan Robinson. Um, and that's probably my biggest fear going in this game is the defense has been great against the run to this point. Only surrendered 3 yards per carry against NC State. I think it was a similar number versus Houston. So they've been very stout in defending the run, but Bijan's just a different animal.
Yeah.
So um, we do have a really solid defensive line. So there's some PFF rankings came out today, and I know people are opinionated on PFF. I kind of I take it with a grain of salt, but it's at
Sure.
least some kind of reference point. And Texas Tech actually has three of the top eight graded defensive linemen in the Big 12 so far.
Wow.
Those three guys kind of rotate at two interior spots. So they've been great in the middle. And then a guy who I was surprised wasn't on that list, Tyree Wilson. He's got a first round NFL draft grade by some pundits. He's a legit 6'6", 275. He was clocked at running 19 and a half miles an hour in camp. So
Wow.
he's just a beast.
Yeah.
So the defensive line is stout. I mean, there's talent there, there's experience there. Um, And I know Bijan has torn up some defenses that have talent and experience. So I'm not saying that I'm not making that as any kind of prediction. But lastly, at the linebacker spot, we have a really good run stuff in linebacker named Krishan Merriweather. So I think there is some support at that second level. Unfortunately, I think lost quite a bit of our linebacker depth against NC State.
I saw that.
Yeah, a player named Bryce Ramirez broke his leg. It's a really,
That
really
was
gruesome
brutal.
injury.
Hmm.
And then later in the game, another one of our linebackers kind of came up with maybe a pulled hamstring or something. So I do kind of worry about that, even if they can sort of contain in the first half.
Right.
By snap 75, 78, 85, when you're out there, a guy like Bijan can wear on you. And I know that y'all can rotate out with Rashawn Johnson as
Sure.
well. So two-headed monster like that is a different animal than what the defense has seen so far. And, I'm hopeful they can just kind of avoid some really back-breaking plays. And I guess one other thing I would note is Tech's defense has been vulnerable to some screen plays, both
Hmm.
against Houston and NC State. And I know Bijan can be very effective catching the ball out of the backfield. And so I think that's an area, even if we are doing well against the run, I could totally see Texas converting some third and longs, or maybe Bijan even, breaking one all the way to the house on a screenplay or something.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I am confident that Tech finally has some personnel in the run defense that is very solid and has played well to this point. But there's just almost nothing that can prepare you for a guy like Bijan. So
Yeah.
we'll see who wins that battle on Saturday.
Right, and it's interesting that you bring up the struggle with the screenplays because for Texas fans, that has been the bane of our existence for years. We've never run a screenplay successfully, but this year I think we've seen a lot better execution from at least the receivers blocking and everything. So I think Texas fans will like to hear that. That's kind of another weak point for the Tech defense. And like you said, Bijan's ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I think he had 73 receiving yards against Alabama. So definitely a matchup I'll be watching out for there. Also in the passing game, I mean Xavier Worthy really broke onto the scene last year against Tech. Had an incredible game. I want to say it was like 230 yards receiving or something, something outrageous. But uh, what is something that the Texas Tech secondary is going to do to slow all of these explosive receivers down, or does it maybe come back to that defensive line you were talking about, getting pressure on the quarterback and making him uncomfortable back there?
Yeah, I do think they'll need to lean on the pass rush, as well as the defense has played to this point. There have been a couple times where they were exploited deep, or where the opposing team had a guy open pretty deep and just couldn't quite connect. And so, with a guy as talented as Worthy, and I only saw one quarter of Quinn Ewers against Alabama. I would have been curious to see how well he stood up for four quarters because he looked so good at the beginning of that game. But he seemed like he was dealing, and so if he is playing and he's healthy, a guy like Worthy scares me. A lot of our defensive backs, especially like the safeties, seem just a little bit more comfortable kind of playing in the short pass game, a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage, closer to the box. And I do think they have some vulnerabilities in one-on-one coverage deep down the field. And I know Worthy is a guy that can kind of exploit that, deep up the seam or down the sideline. So
Right.
they're going to have to, uh, communicate well with each other, not get beat deep, and at least just try to contest those passes. Even Murray State, there's they had a pretty good quarterback actually, and he would kind of scramble around for a little bit. It gets harder and harder as each second goes by for those DBs to cover receivers downfield, and then he'd just chuck it deep, and those receivers would win some one-on-one battles.
Sure.
So yeah, I think both those guys, Worthy and Bijan, as talented as they are, this will be the first time Texas Tech gets a look against guys like that, and so I'll be curious to see how well they stand up against them.
Okay. So at the beginning of the interview, we talked about y'all's top 10 lists. I want to know what was either your favorite or what do you think the most creative one that you put out was?
Oh man,
I know there's a lot,
yeah,
so.
yeah. So man, a lot of different ways I could go with that. I guess first and foremost, let me say that I think at some point this summer, every single fan base accused me of like anti-bias toward their school. Um, and it would be funny because I ranked helmets one time,
Right.
and I think I had Tech like eighth out of 10. And like the next day was throwback helmets, and Tech has a really cool throwback helmet, so I put them
Mhm.
like one or two, and everybody was like, "No, you always put Tech at the very top." And I was like, "We were eighth out of 10,
Right.
yesterday." I think the bridge one was funny, just because Iowa State fans they're like so proud
Mhm.
of that, and which I think is great. It's a cool deal. But that one, like my wife texted me and she was like, "Okay, this is a little bit overboard and ridiculous." So the bridge one was good. Did like a best songs about every Big 12 city.
Yeah,
It's kind of cool.
I saw that one.
Even like the ones that were not my opinion, like just objective facts, like student enrollment.
Hmm.
You would get people arguing. They're like, I don't think that number is right, or like
Right.
campus size. They're like, no, our campus is a lot bigger than that. And I'm like, well, this is just what the internet is telling me at like
Right.
multiple different sources. So it was funny the things that you could get people to argue about. But I guess that's Twitter.
Yeah, as Twitter and that's Big 12 fan bases. I've learned that over my few years of covering Big 12 football. It's like really mostly it's with OU. Honestly, Tech has a lot of people out there that'll come out of the woodworks. Iowa State fans are crazy passionate, and West Virginia
Yeah,
fans too. Those are all the fan bases that I see so much from, at least Big 12 wise. Okay,
yeah.
so last question. Give me a final score prediction for Saturday.
Well, we're a sports betting gambling podcast, and to be honest, when the line came out, I was very surprised. I thought it was going to be kind of one of those tweeners in between, like Texas being favored by 10 or 14. I thought it'd be like 11 or 12 and a half.
Hmm.
So to see it open at Texas -5, and I think some places it even dropped to like -4, -4.5 was
Yeah.
was really surprising to me. And usually when I see a line like that, like if I can remove my emotion from it, I go with like the opposite of my gut because like Vegas is obviously a lot smarter than me. So
Sure.
I figure they know something when something seems like it uh, is a fishy line. But I can't really remove my emotion from it, and I think that Texas has overperformed expectations to this point, and Tech with the quarterback injury and the offensive line performance has kind of sort of underwhelmed week to week. Um, so I do think Texas will win and cover the 4 or 5 point spread. Um, I'm hoping that our defense plays well and it keeps it kind of like a low scoring competitive game. I don't really see our offense having a huge outbreak against Texas.
Hmm.
So I guess if I was going final score, I'd say maybe like Texas 38, Texas Tech 24.
Okay. That's given a lot more than I expected. I was actually talking with a coworker who's a Tech fan, and he said that he thought it would be a two possession game as well. But I
Yeah.
think I think it really depends on who's playing quarterback, and then of course if it is Quinn, how comfortable he is back there. But if you get a
Yeah.
healthy Quinn Ewers, I definitely could see it being like a 14-point game. With Hudson Card back there, I think you get the defensive performance that you want out of Tech, even with Bijan and Xavier. Um, I just don't know if he has it in him to be in that environment too. It's going to be a wild one. So okay, I guess this is the last question. It's not really a question, but tell people where they can find your podcast and on Twitter and whatever you want to plug. Go for it.
Yeah. We're the Gamblin Gauchos Podcast. We mostly focus on Texas Tech, but kind of have a slant or an angle for the entire Big 12. We focus on sports betting odds. And so, every week we'll look at the odds and make some picks around the Big 12. Our podcast is called Gambling Gauchos. That's our Twitter handle, Instagram handle. So if y'all want to follow along with Texas Tech or get that perspective, we're doing a couple podcasts this week. We're actually interviewing Dana Beers from Barstool.
Nice.
He's on his official visit to Lubbock this weekend.
That's
So
right.
we're talking to him on Wednesday night,
Okay.
and then talking to Kyle Umlong on Thursday. He did his usual Tech Fact Tuesday, and we're going to do a fun kind of Longhorn Fact Wednesday tomorrow. So we'll kind of recap that with him on Thursday. So if folks want to check that out, feel free to download our podcast. It's on Apple, Spotify, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast. And we're happy to have listeners from around the Big 12. So feel
Yeah.
free to check us out.
Awesome. All right, Kyle. Well, thank you for your time tonight, man.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good
Appreciate
one.
it.